Syrithal didn't welcome strangers. The moment the Crescent Wanderer pierced its upper atmosphere, Riven Kael could feel the planet pushing back as if the air itself had memory, and didn't like being disturbed. It wasn't just thick, it was intrusive. Violet clouds clung to the hull like sentient mist, refusing to part until the friction of descent forced them to break away in slow, oily ripples. Riven, sitting in his pilot seat, hands steady on the controls, muttered under his breath, still as clingy as the last time. He landed with a practiced hiss of thrusters at Dock 9, one of the smaller bays beneath the crystalline canopy of Syrithal's capital. The city itself shimmered like a frozen sea of amethyst, its spires rising into clouds that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Everything here glowed. Even the shadows seemed to vibrate with some unseen pulse, like a heartbeat you couldn't hear but could feel in your teeth. He grabbed his cargo manifest and slung his duffel over one shoulder. The standard-issue Earth Federation cargo uniform still fit snug despite months of re-entry wear and synthetic wash cycles, though the name patch over his chest Kael was starting to peel at the edges. As he stepped off the loading ramp, the familiar pressure of Syrithal's gravity tugged at his knees. Not quite Earth norm. Just enough to make you feel like you were constantly dragging a secret behind you. The port's entry concourse opened beneath a dome of crystalline plates that filtered natural sunlight into a spectrum of violet and indigo. It wasn't just for show. The locals believed in emotional resonance, and apparently, colors that danced with your feelings helped with balance. Riven didn't buy it. He preferred grayscale corridors and functional lighting. Less chance for your brain to start wandering. He walked up to the checkpoint, where a female officer stood behind a curved console made of some kind of semi-translucent crystal that pulsed faintly beneath her fingertips. Her skin was a deeper shade of violet than most Syrithalians he'd met on past runs, and her uniform bore silver inlays that suggested mid-level diplomatic clearance. Not quite a nobody. Not quite important. Just dangerous enough to make you watch your words. She didn't even look up at first. Cargo ship Crescent Wanderer. Manifest. He slid the tablet across the counter, keeping his gloves on, even as he noticed her eyes flick to them with mild amusement. Her voice was silky, almost too smooth. Still wearing those emotion-dampening gloves, off-worlder? Afraid you'll feel something real. Riven didn't flinch. Didn't smirk. He'd heard it before. Syrithalians love to poke fun at humans' emotional privacy, like it was some quaint superstition. I prefer my emotions to be mine, he said, voice calm, measured. Not rude. Not warm. Neutral. That earned a chuckle from her. I hope that stays true until the end of the day. He tilted his head slightly. Not enough to show curiosity. Just enough to acknowledge the thread under the joke. But her eyes had already returned to the manifest, fingers flicking across the surface as she reviewed the details. Riven didn't realize it yet, but that would be the most prophetic thing anyone would say to him that entire month. He took his clearance stamp and turned toward the main concourse, boots thudding softly on the reflective floor. Above, the dome refracted a slow cascade of light that followed him like a spotlight. Everything in Syrithal was engineered to be beautiful. Uncomfortably beautiful. Like walking through a dream that knew it was a dream and wanted you to feel small for being awake. He glanced at his wrist terminal. 40 minutes until the loading crew would be ready to receive the shipment. Just enough time to find something vaguely resembling coffee, or at least an ingestible liquid with caffeine, from one of the nearby dispensers. But as he passed through the atrium, a familiar itch began to crawl along the back of his neck. The kind he'd only ever gotten in bad landing zones, pirate-controlled space, or right before someone made the mistake of pulling a knife on him in a frontier cantina. Instinct. Pure and home from too many years flying too many routes nobody else wanted. He slowed. Eyes scanned. Movement too fast to be casual. A worker in maintenance gray, moving toward one of the support pylons near the dome's base. Hands too tight. Breathing shallow. Glancing at a wristband like it was a countdown. Something's wrong. Riven changed direction without thinking, footsteps silent despite his size. He didn't need to get closer. He already knew what this was. The worker knelt. Placed something. Too late. Hey! Riven shouted. The figure turned. Eyes wide. Pupils dilated with adrenaline. Then bolted. Riven reached for his emergency beacon, but before he could press the button, the world exploded. And everything changed. The explosion came like betrayal, sudden, violent, and far too precise to be random. 1 second the crowd bustled in typical port chaos, all footsteps and hollow chatter layered beneath mechanical hums and translation drones, and the next, the world fractured in light and fire. There was no warning. Just a blur of gray, a maintenance worker too focused, too quiet, slipping through the crowd with the coiled tension of someone waiting for a signal. Riven saw him only out of the corner of his eye, hunched over one of the central support pylons, palm flicking across the control pad that wasn't standard issue. Then he vanished, swallowed by bodies and sound. Half a breath later, the concourse detonated. The shockwave hit like a wall. Riven barely had time to twist his body and drop, throwing one arm over his head as the force launched him backwards. He felt the heat first searing, dry, unnatural, then the blast of debris and air pressure, sharp and dirty and alive with fury. The floor groaned beneath him, tiles cracking. Light fixtures above shattered, raining fragments of glass and crystal. Screams followed, folding into the mechanical wail of emergency sirens kicking in too late. Riven coughed through the smoke, throat burning, vision red-rimmed and swimming. Years of flying into pirate-controlled sectors, smuggling under planetary blockades, and dodging failed boarding attempts had taught him one sacred rule: when things go to hell, you run. But just as he staggered to his feet, turning toward what was left of the exit corridor, something caught his eye through the blur, a flicker of movement beneath twisted metal. A human-shaped shadow, struggling. Collapsing. And just like that, the rule broke. He ran, boots skidding on polished floor now slick with soot and ash. Smoke parted enough for him to see her clearly and everything else disappeared. She was pinned beneath a support beam that had cracked clean through its mount and crushed a section of the inner platform. The structure had splintered like glass instead of bending like metal, which meant it was old and very, very heavy. Her leg was caught beneath it, not broken, but trapped hard enough that blood pooled beneath her thigh in slow, dark streaks. Her skin shimmered violet-toned, faintly luminous, like starlight bleeding through flesh. Her silver eyes locked with his as he dropped to her side, wide with pain and confusion, but also somehow calm. She was conscious, lucid, and absolutely terrified. "Hold still," he shouted, already sliding his duffel off his shoulder and dropping beside the beam. "I can't move," she gasped, her voice laced with a strange musical cadence, barely audible over the alarms. "I know. I've got you." He planted one foot, braced both arms against the beam, and pushed. It didn't move. Not even a twitch. He tried again, teeth clenched, boots digging into the fractured tile. His arms trembled. His breath came in sharp gasps, the air thick with smoke and pressure. The metal let out a long, eerie groan and shifted, just enough. "Now," he barked. "Slide out." She screamed as she pulled her leg free, but she moved. He grabbed her arm, dragging her just far enough to clear the fall zone. The beam dropped again with a heavy crash that vibrated through the floor. They were safe. For now. But she was shaking. And bleeding. He tore off the outer layer of his jacket and pressed it against the gash along her thigh, but before he could finish wrapping it, she reached out and grabbed his wrist bare skin to skin. His gloves had been torn off in the blast. Her fingers were cool. But what poured into him was fire. Not heat, emotion. Raw, alien, vibrant emotion that surged into his nervous system like electricity. Her fear was the first to hit, cold and tight like being submerged in ice water. Then gratitude, so bright it stung. Then sorrow, old, heavy, endless. And beneath it all, something else. Something ancient. A signal. Like a name, whispered across time and space. His name. He gasped, but didn't pull away. Couldn't. She stared at him, her silver eyes glowing now not just with pain, but with recognition. You're going to be okay, he whispered, voice uneven. She blinked slowly. Then said something that shattered whatever part of him was still pretending this was just another emergency. In our culture, she said softly, that kind of touch, it means a soul bond. He stared at her, stunned. Before he could respond, she leaned forward, wincing through the pain, and pressed her lips to his. The kiss wasn't long. Wasn't passionate. But it was real. And it felt like the world pivoted beneath him. Like the stars had all tilted slightly out of alignment, just to watch what would happen next. And deep inside, though he didn't know it yet, a second bond had already formed. Not through lips or skin, but through memory. Through something that had been waiting in both of them. For years. For lifetimes. When the emergency medics arrived, Riven expected questions. He expected to be scanned, bandaged, maybe even interrogated about the explosion. What he didn't expect was to be escorted. No, escorted was too polite a word. Marched down a glowing corridor by two tall, silent figures wearing ceremonial armor polished to a mirror shine. They didn't introduce themselves. They didn't explain anything. They just said, "You are required to appear before the Tribunal of Resonance," as if it was the most normal thing in the galaxy. Like it was standard procedure after saving someone's life. Riven tried protesting. "Look, I'm a cargo pilot, not a criminal. I didn't plant the damn bomb, I helped stop it." They didn't even glance at him. By the time the doors to the tribunal chamber hissed open, he realized this wasn't about the explosion. This was about her. The chamber inside was no other word, breathtaking. A wide, circular hall carved from living crystal that hummed faintly with energy, as if the structure itself was listening. Light poured from the ceiling in soft waves, refracting through the translucent walls in patterns that shifted depending on his heart rate. He hated how beautiful it was. It made everything feel ceremonial. Final. Permanent. And then he saw her again. Elira. Sitting in the center of the room on a raised platform, leg now healed with some kind of bio-organic brace, but her face pale. Her silver eyes met his. Not afraid. Just sad. Apologetic. 5 elders sat above her, their robes flowing like liquid light, their faces unreadable. The central figure spoke with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Riven Kael of Earth. Do you acknowledge the kiss exchanged with Elira of House Arvelus? He blinked. What? The voice didn't change. Do you deny physical contact, bare skin to skin followed by the act of mouth-to-mouth exchange? You mean the kiss, he scoffed. She was bleeding. She was in shock. She kissed me, I didn't know it was look, where I'm from, that's called gratitude. Not a legal binding. A murmur went through the chamber like distant wind. One of the other elders lifted a hand, summoning a floating crystal projection. Riven stared in disbelief as a hologram appeared, a perfect recording of that moment in the smoke and wreckage. Him leaning over her. Her hand on his cheek. The kiss. You were recording that, he shouted. During a terrorist attack. Public spaces are always monitored for matters of resonance law, the central elder said. This is not about surveillance. It is about sacred bonds. And what has been witnessed, cannot be undone. Riven laughed once, hollow. Okay. So what? I kissed her. Big deal. Earth law says that's not even grounds for a second date unless both parties text each other afterward. The elder tilted their head. This is not Earth. On Syrithal, such contact performed without emotional shielding, during a state of heightened psychic exposure constitutes a soul bind. A union not just of flesh, but of intent. Whether you knew it or not. He turned to Elira, desperate. Tell them it was a mistake. That it didn't mean anything. But she was already shaking her head slowly. I didn't think. I was overwhelmed. I forgot the ritual doesn't require conscious intent. Only connection. And Riven. I felt you. I felt your heart. His jaw clenched. You felt a guy trying to save your life, not sign a marriage contract. That was when the side doors opened. And 4 other women entered. Each one more stunning and more terrifying than the last. They took their places around Elira, silent but charged with presence. Riven could feel the air change. The resonance. Like walking into a storm and knowing it was watching him. These are the daughters of House Arvelus, the elder intoned. The 5-fold sisters. By law of the ancient pact, a soul bind to one is a soul bind to all. His mouth went dry. You're telling me, because she kissed me, I'm now legally bound to her sisters too. One of them stepped forward. Her posture was military straight. Her voice like a blade dipped in sarcasm. Let's be clear, off-worlder. I'm Vilas, combat captain, and protector of the house. I didn't choose this any more than you did. So don't flatter yourself. Another one circled him, eyes half-lidded, smile playful. I'm Nissa, cultural liaison. Artist. Empathy. I think I'll enjoy learning your earthly instincts. Then came Chiral, silent until she spoke. Her voice was flat, analytical. His emotional pattern suggests repressed intimacy and unresolved loss. Curious foundation for long-term merging. And finally, the one who didn't speak at all at first. She simply watched him. Tall. Serene. Theron. The eldest. When she did speak, her words rang with a strange gravity. The heart device knows what we do not. It bonds only with one who can anchor us. All 5. And whether we like it or not, you are now part of us. Riven looked at them, eyes wide. A pilot. A smuggler. A whiskey runner with a discount health plan. Now soulbound to 5 billion sisters because of one goddamn kiss. He shook his head. This is a mistake. The tribunal elder's voice fell like a sentence. No, Riven Kael. This is the law. There are wars easier to win than understanding 5 billion women. Riven Kael, former whiskey hauler, current emotional hostage of House Arvelus, realized this roughly 10 minutes into what the Syrithalians called a harmony initiation period, a phrase that sounded like something you'd find in a self-help book, not an ancient legal contract that apparently bound his fate to 5 very different and very opinionated sisters. It began with a formal induction ceremony, which, in Earth terms, was less ceremony and more surprise interrogation in a garden made of psychic crystal. He was brought barefoot to the Garden of Resonant Bloom, a place where the ground shimmered like glass and the air sang when you breathed too hard. The 5 sisters waited for him there, each standing in a separate segment of a massive 5-pointed formation etched into the earth. Each point glowed with its own unique hue, pulsing in time with something unseen, something deeper than heartbeats. Elira stood at the center. "Today begins the harmony," she said softly. "If the core is to be awakened, you must build a bridge to each of us." Riven rubbed the back of his neck. "What happens if the bridge collapses?" Nissa the artist smiled. "Then we all fall, darling. Spectacularly." Violus was first. The warrior. The shield of House Arvelus. She didn't believe in words. Only action. Her version of harmony? Dropping him into a sparring arena at dawn with a blunt staff and barking, "If you can't defend your mind, then defend your skin." Riven lasted 14 seconds in the first round. The second round, he managed a full minute before she knocked him flat and growled, "Emotion is weakness. So show me yours, Earthman." He spat blood, grinned up at her, and muttered, "You're cute when you're homicidal." She blinked. Then for the first time laughed. Just once. Short. But real. Nissa came next. Where Violus was steel, Nissa was velvet and smoke. Her eyes always half-lidded, her voice dipped in mischief. She led him to a gallery built from living color and sound canvases that shifted based on the viewer's emotions, sculptures that wept if you stared too long. "Art," she explained, "is just unshielded thought." She gave him paint. He froze. "I don't do art," he protested. "Exactly," she whispered. "That's why it will be honest." He painted. At first, it was chaos. But as the brush moved, something inside him loosened. Old memories. Childhood stars. His first spacecraft. His mother's laugh. When he finished, the canvas shimmered, revealing not color but feeling. And Nissa's smile turned soft. "I can work with this," she said. And kissed his cheek without asking. Chiral, the scientist, didn't ask him to fight or feel. She asked him to think. Her domain was the Tower of Echoed Logic, a cold monolith of glass and code. There, surrounded by neural feedback systems and pulse-mapped analytics, she hooked him into a biotet interface and told him, "Let's study you." "You sure know how to make a guy feel warm and fuzzy," Riven muttered. But the longer they worked, the more he saw the curiosity behind her silence. The way she leaned in when his stress levels fluctuated. The subtle touch she gave his hand when he flinched at a memory of being left behind in deep space. "You are uniquely erratic," she finally said. "But your emotional resonance with our lattice is optimal. Statistically improbable." He chuckled. "I'm a walking anomaly. Get used to it." She didn't smile. But her eyes softened. Theron was different. The eldest. The watcher. The one who'd spoken the fewest words, yet somehow carried the most weight. She didn't speak when she led him out of the city, far into the violet highlands. They climbed for hours, until the twin moons of Syrithal hung low and golden over jagged cliffs. At the top was a stone altar bathed in wind and silence. "What now?" he asked. She simply pointed to the sky. And then she spoke. We are each a different current in a storm. But the core is not a storm. It is the eye. Still. Waiting. He said nothing. Just stood beside her. Minutes passed. Finally, she said, "You didn't run. Not after the kiss. Not after the tribunal. Not even after we showed you the cost." He turned. "I wanted to." She smiled. "Then you are braver than you know. Harmony is not agreement. It is persistence. You persist. That is, enough." And Elira? She was the center of it all. She met him at the Crystal Basin the following night. No trials. No challenges. Just a quiet place where emotion could exist without judgment. "I never meant to bind you," she whispered. "I know," Riven said. "But I'm still here." They sat side by side, their hands just barely touching. "I used to believe only those born of our world could activate the core," she said. "But the core doesn't respond to blood. It responds to truth." He looked at her. "And what if I don't know what my truth is?" She leaned in, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let us find it together." By the end of the 5th day, Riven Kael, who once prided himself on being emotionally unavailable, found himself tethered to 5 women who could break him apart and rebuild him without lifting a weapon. And strangely, he didn't hate it. He didn't understand it. But something inside him whispered that this, bizarre and terrifying as it was, might be the first time in his life he wasn't running from something, but toward it. They were finally beginning to breathe. For the first time since that chaotic day in the terminal, Riven felt the pounding pressure in his chest lessen, just a little. The Harmony initiation period, as absurd as it sounded, had become something strangely grounding. He had shared silence with Aaron, science with Chiral, movement with Vilas, emotions with Elira, and whatever the hell that was with Nissa. And in between the confusion, the exhaustion, and the occasional bruised ego, something resembling connection had taken root. Not just with him but with his place. Syrithal. A world that used to feel like a dream trying to trap him, now felt like a story that hadn't been written yet, waiting for him to hold the pen. He didn't expect it to last. He just didn't expect the end to come so soon. The attack began without warning. Again. But this time, it wasn't a terrorist bomb in a port. It was a fleet. The Braxian Syndicate hadn't been heard from in nearly a generation. Thought extinct, broken by their failure to steal the secrets of the core of resonance long ago. But power doesn't die quietly, it waits. Regroups. Evolves. And now, it returned in orbit above Syrithal, riding stealth waves, slipping past planetary scans, until the sky lit up with silent fire. The palace shook. Energy blasts rained down from orbit, targeting not cities, not infrastructure but one specific location, the Heart Vault. They wanted the core. No. They wanted him. Alarms wailed through the crystalline corridors as panic took shape. Staff ran. Drones mobilized. The sisters, each in their respective wings, responded with terrifying precision. Vilas was already in combat gear, issuing orders through a shimmering tactical grid. Shields at 64%. Divert core output to inner perimeter and deploy the resonant guard. Riven stays inside. He's the asset. Excuse me. Riven stepped into the war room, already pulling on a tactical harness that definitely wasn't made for hauling whiskey. Vilas spun. You're not a soldier. No, he growled, but I'm the reason they're here. Her jaw tightened. But she didn't argue. Meanwhile, Chiral appeared on a projection screen, They are jamming psychic comms. They are trying to collapse the harmony net. If they isolate our sisters emotionally, the core will destabilize. Nissa chimed in next, from the West Wing where cultural refugees were being sheltered. They are targeting empathic centers. Art. Memory. Connection. They are not here to destroy us. They want to erase what we feel. Theron's voice cut through the chamber, calm but colder than a blade. If they sever our bonds, Riven, the core dies. And with it the link binding all 5 sisters. And him. When the first Braxian soldiers breached the outer gardens, Riven was already moving. Against Violus's orders, against logic, against every instinct he'd trained into himself about when to run and when to fight. He wasn't a soldier. But this wasn't war. This was family. He found Elira alone, inside the vault. Her hands were pressed to the crystalline structure of the core, no longer dormant, but trembling with unstable pulses of light. Her face was pale. Sweat shimmered on her brow. She was trying to stabilize it alone. She turned when he entered. Her eyes, those impossible silver eyes, were full of pain. I can't hold it. Not without the others. The threads are fraying. I feel them slipping. Nis is flooded with confusion. Kyrill's logic is tangled. Violus is bleeding, and Theron is trying to hold the whole web herself. I can't do this. He didn't answer. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. She gasped, not from the embrace, but from the contact. Skin to skin. It was reckless. It was dangerous. It was exactly what the core needed. The moment their bodies touched, light exploded between them. Not fire. Not heat. Emotion. It roared through Riven like a sun waking up inside his ribcage. Elira's love. Her terror. Her fierce, stubborn faith in him. And his own feelings surged back, untamed, flawed, human. But real. The core responded. It pulsed once. Then again. And then it began to scream, not a sound, but a resonance that echoed through every bonded soul on the planet. The network began to stabilize. 1 bond lit up. Then 2. Then all 5. In the chaos, as Braxian forces advanced, a new force rose to meet them, not soldiers. Not weapons. 5 women. 1 human. And a core that now pulsed with something it hadn't known in centuries. Harmony. And at the center, Riven Kael stood, not because he wanted to be a hero, but because in the end, humanity fights hardest when it loves something enough to stay. It wasn't supposed to be him. That truth echoed somewhere deep in Riven's bones as the core of resonance screamed beneath his feet, light splintering across the chamber like threads of fate unraveling in reverse. Around him, the heart vault trembled, not from bombs, not from weapons, but from possibility collapsing under the weight of ancient code and raw emotion. Elira collapsed to her knees, gasping. It's too much, I can't hold it. We're not aligned. Riven dropped beside her, catching her shoulders. Then let me help. You're not of Syrithal, she cried. You don't have the lattice, you don't have the bloodline. I don't need your blood, he whispered, voice shaking. I have you. Then, no hesitation, he pulled off the last scrap of protective fabric from his chest, pressing his hand directly to the heart crystal embedded in the vault's core surface. Pain hit him first. Not pain like knives or fire, but emotional pain, pure and unfiltered, centuries of failed connections, lost bearers, broken attempts to activate the core. Regret, grief, longing. It rushed into him like a flood, slamming through memories not his own. He felt the screams of the last Heartbearer, burning from the inside. He felt Aaron's fear, buried under layers of duty. He felt Nissa's aching loneliness masked by performance. Kyrill's confusion. Violus's guilt. Elira's hope. And then, silence. A voice, ancient and androgynous, spoke not in sound, but in remembrance. You are not chosen by blood. You are chosen by pain endured. And love given freely. The core stopped pulsing. It breathed. And in that breath, it accepted him. His back arched. The crystal beneath his palm liquefied into golden light and flowed into his skin. He screamed not because it hurt, but because his entire self was expanding, fracturing, and rebuilding at once. His heart stopped beating. And then restarted. But now it beat in harmony with 5 others. Across the palace, across the battlefields, 5 sisters felt it sink. Theron dropped to one knee, her mind finally unburdened. Kyrill's logical map lit up like a supernova. Nissa gasped and laughed at once, her fingers sparking with emotional color. Violus paused mid-swing, blade trembling, as calm overtook her rage. Elira clutched Riven's hand with tears running freely down her face. He's inside the core, she whispered. He's not holding it. He is it. The room settled. Riven opened his eyes. They glowed crystal amber, threaded with violet. Not fully Syrithalian. Not fully human. Something new. In his chest, beneath the skin, the core now lived no longer an artifact. A heart. His. He stood slowly. Around him, the architecture reacted. Walls straightened. Air thickened with warmth. The entire vault resonated with his breath. He turned to Elira. I'm still me, he said, unsure. She nodded. You're more than you? He stepped toward her. Then paused. I'm scared. She smiled through her tears. Good. That means you're still human. He kissed her, not the accidental, trembling kiss of a moment stolen during chaos, but a choice. A commitment. And somewhere in the orbit above, the Braxian flagship exploded under the pressure of a signal it could not process, a resonance broadcast from Riven's heart that shattered every artificial dampener in their fleet. Not a weapon. Not a command. Just a single emotional pulse carried across the stars. You cannot conquer what you refuse to feel. He had become the Heartbearer. Not by fate. Not by prophecy. But because, when given the choice to run or stay, to shut down or open up, he chose to feel. 3 weeks after the Braxian fleet disintegrated in orbit, the skies of Syrithal no longer pulsed with sirens, but with soft amber auroras, residual echoes from the core's awakening. The Heart Vault, once sealed and feared, had become a new capital of resonance diplomacy. Ambassadors from across 3 star clusters now came not for conquest, but for connection. At the center of it all stood the man who never asked for any of this. Riven Kael. Smuggler. Whiskey runner. Former pilot of the Crescent Wanderer. Current bearer of a galactic artifact that literally beats in his chest. He hated the speeches. Hated the robes they made him wear. But worst of all, he hated the way people looked at him now. Like he wasn't human anymore. Like he had become myth. And in some terrifying, quiet way, maybe he had. You didn't show up to the delegation welcoming, Theron said, entering his chamber without knocking. Riven stood by the arched window, watching wind move through the violet gardens below. I don't do well with politics, he muttered. She folded her arms. You're leading a coalition of 15 species through shared emotional architecture. You are politics. He exhaled. That's what scares me. Theron walked up beside him. Her eyes, always quiet, now held something like softness. You're adapting, she said. I'm surviving, he corrected. She touched his shoulder, just briefly. That's what Syrithalians call evolving. Later that evening, Nissa found him in the lower galleries alone, staring at a sculpture that now pulsed with his own emotional imprint. You've changed the entire aesthetic, she teased. Everything used to be so restrained. Now even the shadows blush. He didn't smile. Wasn't trying to change anything. She stepped closer, trailing her fingers across the humming crystal. You didn't try. You felt. And that's rarer than genius. Is that your way of saying you still want to kiss me? He asked. She tilted her head. Oh, I always want to. But want and should are different conversations. The conversations didn't stop. Violus approached him on the training field. They sparred, as they always had. He still lost, as he always did. But when he refused to stay down again and again, she knelt beside him, breathing hard. You make a terrible soldier, she said. But a better shield than any I've ever seen. He blinked. Was that a compliment? She looked away. It was a warning. Then walked off before he could ask what that meant. Chiral didn't meet him with words. She simply showed him data. Your neural lattice is synchronizing with ours permanently, she said, calm as always. So no going back, he asked. Not unless you want your heart to stop beating. That's direct. I'm a scientist. But if it helps, she hesitated. Then. I no longer observe you. I trust you. He looked at her for a long time. Coming from you, that's like a love confession. Her lips twitched. Almost a smile. And then there was Elira. They met beneath the original crystal bloom, the place they'd first touched. First kissed. The place that broke his life, and gave him a new one. She said nothing at first. Just stood there, letting the wind move through her hair, silver eyes reflecting stars he couldn't name. I didn't mean to fall in love with you, she finally said. I didn't mean to fall into your world, he replied. She stepped closer. You changed us. You changed me. Not just by waking the core, but by staying. When you could have left. He didn't answer. He stepped forward. And for the first time since the war ended, they kissed again, not out of panic, or ceremony, or fate. But choice. In the days that followed, the palace no longer asked which sister he would choose. Because he didn't. The truth was simpler and messy. They chose each other. Each in their own way. But only Elira shared his bed. Only Elira heard the strange, human rhythm of his dreams. Only Elira called him mine. And in that, he found peace. And yet, late at night, staring into the sky that now carried his pulse across the stars, Riven still whispered. I'm still human. Still afraid. Still figuring it out. And the core within his chest answered. Not in words. But in a single, quiet feeling. You are not alone. It had been 60 days since the Braxian attack. 40 since the Harmony Accord was signed. 12 since Riven last woke up screaming. And not from nightmares. From memories that weren't his. They came in flashes, now pieces of ancient bearers, of lost voices encoded into the core. Names he'd never spoken. Lives he'd never lived. Emotions so raw they scraped the edges of his soul, A mother cradling her dying child under falling suns, a soldier kissing a comrade before walking into a breach of light, a girl watching her twin dissolve into crystal to save a world she didn't understand. Each fragment came with weight, and none came with permission. Elira found him on the fifth night, barefoot on the sky bridge, surrounded by the stars of Syrithal's upper stratosphere. No guards. No robes. Just a man in silence, breathing in a sky that still didn't feel like his. "You don't sleep," she said softly. "I don't know if I need to anymore," he replied. She stepped beside him. "You still dream." He didn't respond right away. The wind carried the silence for him. Then, "I'm forgetting what it feels like to be just me?" Elira looked at him, not with pity but with understanding. She knew that feeling. She had lived with the expectations of legacy her whole life. The only difference was, he never asked for his. "You're not lost," she said. "You're layered." He chuckled once, dry. Layered. Sounds like a pastry. Or a problem. She smiled, brushing a hand against his arm. Or a universe. And you're still Riven. Still the man who tried to carry a beam twice his weight just to save someone he didn't know. "Yeah," he whispered. "But now I also remember dying on a planet called Solmeth, in a war that ended before Earth discovered radio." The glow in his eyes flickered just for a second. "I remember having wings, Elira. Wings made of glass and breath." She reached up, touched his face. "Then let those memories remind you, you carry what others died for. Not because you owe them, but because you're strong enough to hold what they could not." He kissed her not as a man seeking comfort, but as one holding onto the last thread that reminded him of now. Of this life. Of her. Later, in the quiet of his personal chamber, he sat alone. The core's pulse was faint, dormant, not silent. It slept now, like an animal fed, waiting for the next hunger. He pressed his palm to his chest. "Who am I?" And the core replied not in voice, but in sensation. "You are the memory of stars. The echo of hands held before falling. You are what remains when no one else stayed." He closed his eyes. And cried. Not from pain. But from finally understanding what it meant to belong, not to a place, not to a people, but to a purpose. In the days that followed, Riven didn't speak of the memories. He didn't need to. The sisters knew. Each of them in their own way carried the fragments too. Now they weren't just sisters of blood but sisters in resonance. In burden. In bond. And as the core grew quiet, and the galaxy exhaled, one truth remained. The universe had changed. Not from weapons. Not from war. But from a man who chose to feel, when all others chose to run. The delegation from Earth arrived with polished boots, silver collars, and the kind of practiced smile that Riven had long since stopped trusting. They wore Earth Federation crests on their chests and words like diplomatic reintegration and honorary debrief dripping from their mouths like oil. They came with a ship. And with an offer. "Return with us," said the lead ambassador, a woman named Ferris who spoke with the ease of someone who believed in paperwork more than people. "You'll be welcomed. Decorated. Studied, perhaps, but only in the name of progress." Riven leaned back in his seat, fingers tapping the pulse crystal embedded in his wrist, a small echo of the core that traveled with him now like a second heartbeat. "Studied," he repeated, flatly. Ferris hesitated. "We need to understand what's happened to you. What the core has done. Humanity deserves to know." He looked out the window of the council chamber, where the violet skies of Syrithal shifted slowly with emotion, coloring the horizon with the calm of a recovering people. In the distance, he could see the silhouette of Elira standing among children learning to paint with emotional dyes. Humanity, he said slowly, deserves a lot of things. But I'm not sure they deserve me. She frowned. Are you saying you're no longer one of us? He turned back to her, calmly. I'm saying I finally became who I was meant to be. And it didn't happen on Earth. That night, he wandered through the Echo Gardens, where crystals bloomed only in response to memory. As he walked, the stones shimmered each step, lighting up echoes of his journey, the terminal explosion, the kiss, the tribunal, the sparring, the first time he heard Nissa laugh like she meant it. Theron waited for him there. You've been quiet, she said. I've been thinking. Dangerous. He smirked. They want me back. Earth? The Federation. They think I'm still theirs. Theron looked at him, long and level. Are you? He didn't answer. But she already knew. Later, he stood on the skybridge once more, with all 5 sisters beside him. Each had come not as judge or bondholder, but as family. Violus said, they can't force you. But they will pull. Chiral added, statistically, your return would destabilize the harmony lattice. Emotionally, it would hurt. Nissa touched his cheek. But if you choose to leave, we'll make art from the ache. Theron stood silent, watching. And Elira stepped forward last. She didn't plead. She didn't beg. She simply asked, will you stay? Not because of the bond. Not because of the core. But because this. She took his hand. Placed it on her chest. Is your home now? He looked at her. At them. At the world that had broken and healed him. At the sky that now pulsed in his rhythm. And he whispered. I was never meant to fly in circles forever. Then louder. I stay. No contracts. No applause. Just 5 women who nodded. And a man who smiled not because he won a war. But because he finally stopped running. Let me tell you a story. The child blinked, eyes wide, legs folded beneath a cloak too big for her. The stars of Syrithal shimmered above, soft and violet, casting shadows across the garden pavilion where the old man sat still strong, still sharp, but with silver streaking his hair now and lines that hadn't been there decades ago. Not from age. From memory. The girl, part human, part something else, tilted her head. Is it a real story? Riven Kael smiled. It's the truest one I know. He leaned back, letting his fingers trace the grooves of the stone bench carved long ago in the shape of 5 wings, each feather etched with an emotion, strength, curiosity, art, insight, hope. There was a man once. He flew alone. Ran from everything: family, love, responsibility. Until one day, a woman kissed him during an explosion, and ruined his whole plan. The child giggled. Sounds like a weird story. Oh, it gets weirder, Riven said with a wink. Because that one kiss? It bound him to not just her but her 4 sisters, too. Each one stranger and scarier than the last. The girl's mouth dropped open. That's a lot of girlfriends. He laughed, the sound cracked by time but still full of life. Oh, they weren't girlfriends. They were gravity. And each one pulled him into a new version of himself. She leaned forward. So what happened next? He looked up at the sky. The same sky. Always the same. still humming with a pulse that never left his chest. He stayed. He changed. He felt. And the galaxy changed with him. A pause. The girl whispered, "Was it scary?" Riven nodded. "Terrifying." "Did he cry?" "Many times." "Did he ever want to leave?" He turned to look at her. "Really look?" And said, quietly, "Only once." But he didn't. Because he realized, no one else could feel what he felt and stay standing. She sat in silence for a long moment. Then reached out and took his hand. "Do you think I'll ever have a story like that?" He smiled. "No. Yours will be even better." The wind passed through the garden then, rustling crystal blossoms. In the distance, 5 lights shimmered not in sky, but in memory. Watching. Laughing. Waiting. And in the stillness between heartbeats, the core pulsed once more. Not to awaken war. Not to summon pain. But to remind the stars. This isn't the end. It never was.